Hi there, and thank you for tuning in to The Social Circus, where every week we dive into a variety of topics covering social media, mindset, and how to run your business. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. Hello, my lovely listeners, and welcome to episode 143 of The Social Circus. My name is Sarah Thompson, and I am your host each and every week on this wonderful podcast. Now, today I'm doing another personal episode, which totally follows on from last week, where I talked about the reflections on my 14 years in business. So today I'm going to be talking about endometriosis. And there are a few reasons for me wanting to talk about this. For a start, I am an endometriosis sufferer, and I've pretty much suffered with it since I was about 15, so my entire adult life. And it is also March in Australia is Endometriosis Awareness Month. And I still believe that there is a lot of misinformation or little known about this disease and what does it mean and why do we need to understand and know of its importance. So please bear with me because I'm going to be sharing a few statistics today, which I definitely promise I will read and not make up, and tell you a little bit about my personal journey having this disease as well. So if you are not aware of what endometriosis is, it is a condition that is unique to women or women assigned as female at birth. So you do have to have a uterus and some ovaries for you to have this condition. And at the moment, as I present this, which is March 2025, there is a lot that we don't know about this disease. So first of all, we do not know what causes endometriosis. We do know what it is, but we don't know why some women get it and other women don't. We also don't have a cure for it. So there are lots of treatments available, but nothing which will definitively get rid of endometriosis in a woman who has it. The other thing that is really challenging, which I would love to have been announced to change, and we're not far away from this. Outside of surgery, there is no diagnostic tool which definitively says that a woman has endometriosis. So all of those are pretty significant things because we don't know what causes it. We struggle to diagnose it outside of cutting a woman open, and we can't cure it. So it's a pretty debilitating disease for a start. So what endometriosis actually is, and it commonly starts once we start menstruating during our teenage years, and it can come on very quickly or it can come on whenever it feels like it, okay? So what actually happens with endometriosis is the lining of your uterus, which is called the endometrium, which occurs inside your uterus, and every month when you have a period, that lining of uterus is shed, and that's our cycle of our 28-day average for a period. Very healthy, very normal, is unusual for a woman not to experience this. But if you have endometriosis, what happens is the endometrial tissue or the cells occur outside of the uterus. So they typically start to occur on the outside lining of the uterus, and then they can spread throughout the body. So what this means that when you have your period, instead of you shedding the lining of your uterus out to your vagina and you're all healthy and fine, what actually happens is you shed those endometrial cells into your abdomen. And obviously there's nowhere for them to go. So what starts to happen is you get a buildup of your uterus. So your lining of your uterus becomes very thick. This can make it very rigid. It can make things like having sex really painful and unpleasant. It can start to adhere to other parts like your fallopian tubes, your ovary, and start to cause endometrial cysts, which again are very painful. If you have extensive endometriosis, so it's like many things like cancer, it goes up to stage 4. Stage 4 is defined as like endometrium cells being found on non-reproductive organs, so things like your bowel, your bladder, inside your abdomen is really common. However, we have had, with the wonderful miracles of modern science, we have now we know that it occurs all over the body. So it has been found in women's brains, in their lungs, all over your body. Endometrial tissue can occur once you have endometriosis. Now, one of the interesting things about this condition is, first and foremost, as women, we are conditioned to believe that our periods are painful. And so if you have endometriosis, and I lived with this for a long time, I actually wondered why everyone was coping okay when I wasn't coping. And what I mean by that is we are not told what pain should look like, what is normal pain and what is not normal pain. So for me, I've only experienced periods through the lens of having endometriosis. So when I was a teenager, I complained so much to my mum. And I just want to keep in mind, I'm 50, so this is 35 years ago. And my mum was really worried, but kind of thought maybe I was a little bit dramatic or maybe I was a hypochondriac. And it was only after about a year of complaining, she finally took me to a GP who put me on the pill because that's what they did in those days. And they didn't do any further examinations. Now, that did help a sniff and it improved some of my pain and actually, but it didn't really address that there was any problem going on. So my experience is really, really common in that how do we tell people your pain is not normal? And so the endometriosis, there's endometriosis awareness foundations and charities, and they do a lot of education around this. And the prevailing education is if you can't control your pain with normal painkillers like over the counter, then you should go to your GP to ask for further investigation. So I love that because it actually gives you a scale of kind of going, well, I wasn't coping at all and that should have been investigated, but I didn't know that my pain wasn't everyone else's pain. And I kind of thought, how are women walking around having a period and not wanting to lie in bed and not wanting to rock at themselves? I know that I used to sleep on my bathroom floor at night because the tiles were really cold and it felt really good. None of that's normal, but because we don't talk about this disease and this condition, and particularly 35 years ago, we used to use all these ridiculous euphemisms like, oh, Aunt Flo's coming to visit. We didn't even just call it menstruating and periods and things like that. We've come a long way, thank goodness. I mean, we got rid of sanitary care in supermarkets and we just call it period care now. I love that. Let's just talk about like what it is. And all of that kind of evasiveness of not talking about it leads women to not get diagnosed for a very long time because we don't understand that our pain is not normal and we don't understand that we might have a medical condition. So from the age of 15, I suffered period pain. I've been to see a couple of GPs. I remember being at university and the GP sending me for an ultrasound. I don't know if they knew what they were looking for, but I was about 27 when I finally got diagnosed. But at that point, my pain was so severe. I lost consciousness a few times from the pain. I was bedridden constantly. At the time, you could get in Australia over-the-counter Panadeine Forte, which is paracetamol and codeine. I don't know how many of those I used to chomp through, but way too many, I think. And that was just to get out of bed and function. Like I wasn't living a great life. I was existing in pain. And I luckily had a GP, I lived in Sydney at the time, who was really unhappy of why I was losing consciousness because that's a sign of very severe pain. And sort of really pushed, I think I can't remember if it was MRI or CT scan because 20 odd years ago and I've got perimenopause and no memory. But at the time, when I had my first kind of imaging done of my abdomen, I had 45 cysts around my ovary and uterus. And he was like, that's really bad. And then I was sent and I had my first surgery and I was officially diagnosed with endometriosis. I remember at the time when I was diagnosed, being given a DL flyer. There was like a trifold flyer that says, what is endometriosis? I had no idea what it was. And I remember at the time thinking, at least I've not got cancer, I'm not going to die, because I actually was living in such a bad way that that's what I thought was ahead of me. And so I had never heard of endometriosis. I had no idea it was a thing. And there was a part of me that thought I just had painful periods and mine were more painful than other people's. I didn't realize it was a full-blown disease that I was going to probably live with, well, I do live with, my entire adult life. And I think one of the things that's really hard is that many people don't know what the disease is. They don't realize it is not painful periods. It is a really significant disease that impacts so many parts of our lives. So I hope that now you know what it is, and I hope that you will talk to all the women in your life about it, because both my sons, they know exactly what endometriosis is. They're very comfortable talking about periods. And that's really, really important, because the more we have conversations about this, the more we talk about the fact that, is this normal? Is it not normal? Do you think you should speak to your doctor about it? Do you think you should ask for, different kinds of things? So I really hope that after today's episode, you're going to feel inspired to have conversations, whether it's about yourself or about people in your life, because we need to talk about the fact that pain is not normal. Now, endometriosis is incredibly common. And I think almost every year they revise the statistics. So it's currently 1 in 9 people assigned as female at birth that have endometriosis. Okay, so it's incredibly common. So if we were to look at Australia, it's estimated that 1 million people in Australia have endometriosis. And if you want to think about a comparison, that means that approximately of all Australians, okay, we have about 5% of our population living with endometriosis. That is a huge statistic, okay? And if you think about, if you look around a room or something, there is more than likely someone in that room that has endometriosis. And most of us have never heard of it, have never talked about it, don't really understand what it is, and it's incredibly common. I think one of the biggest interesting things is that if we compare it to a disease that most of us have heard about, so something like type 1 diabetes. Everybody knows what type 1 diabetes is. We are taught it throughout our schooling system. We understand what it is, and it is a terrible, debilitating disease to have type 1 diabetes. But it is nowhere near as common as endometriosis. So in our schooling system currently, children, and my son did human biology all the way through to year 12 as an ATAR subject, they're not taught beyond, I think, one sentence in one textbook that endometriosis even exists, okay? And yet they do whole modules on type 1 diabetes, and yet it's less common. So we're still up against the challenge of talking about a condition that is inherently a female-only condition, okay? And as a consequence of that, because for millennia, our lawmakers, our decision makers, the people who sign the checks are all men, it has not been of high importance and high priority. Fortunately, things are changing. So in the last couple of years in Australia, the federal government has, first of all, it was only, just so you know, it was only ever mentioned in Parliament in Australia about 7 years ago. It was the first time it was mentioned in Parliament, which I think is really profound that it wasn't talked about before that. It now gets some funding. And I think the federal government allocated about 50 million over sort of 3 years to help with funding. And as a result of increased funding, we see breakthroughs coming through. So at the moment, there are several programs throughout the world. And here in Australia, we are on the cusp of a huge breakthrough. And it's a university in Queensland who are very close to having a blood test to be able to test endometriosis, which means you don't have to go and have a surgery to find out you have a medical condition. You can have a blood test. So funding helps support research which finds answers. So we haven't got a cure yet, but we might have a better diagnostic tool. So remember that if you have a chance to speak to your members of parliament, we're about to come into a federal election in Australia. Things like endometriosis are such significant issues to all Australians because it has a huge impact on our life, on our quality of life, on how much we access healthcare, how much we access mental health facilities. All of this is important. And if we can improve our diagnostic tools, improve the way in which it's managed, we know that it's going to have an impact on all of us as a society. So I'm really optimistic that things are improving and that we're starting to see more funding and more research going on within this space. And what we also know that in the time that I have been treated, so let's just say from when I'm 28 to now as a 50-year-old, the way in which it's now treated and diagnosed is significantly different. I've had 8 surgeries for my endometriosis. That would never happen now. That's far too many surgeries because every time you have surgery, it creates adhesions and scar tissues, which in and of themselves cause ongoing pain, which I now live with. Simply because you keep cutting someone open and your body creates scar tissue and all these things. So they don't treat it so much with surgery. There are lots of other treatments. There are lots of now specialist gynecologists who specialize in the treatment of endometriosis and the management of endometriosis. There is a lot more understanding of what it is as a condition, so what things can help as in complementary therapies. And I think the more that we understand this, the closer we get to people being able to live with this condition. So I want you to understand that for us as sufferers, first of all, if I was to tell you I had stage 1 versus stage 4 endometriosis, stage 1 obviously being the less significant, stage 4 being I have it occurring in organs other than my reproductive organs, it would make you think that having stage 4 must be the worst. I have stage 4, which means it occurs on my other organs. And that must mean I have the worst type of endometriosis. But here's one of the things that's very hard to understand with this disease is that the relationship between how much endometriosis I have in my body and my pain is non-existent. I could have such a tiny amount of endometriosis and live with significant pain. Conversely, I could have stage 4 and have my body riddled with it and live with very minimal pain. And this again makes it very hard to treat a disease because for doctors, it's really easy for them to say, well, you've only got stage 1, you should be okay. And the person's like, well, but I'm not. So the research now tells us there's no correlation between the amount of endometriosis and the pain in which you live with. And that makes me really excited because once our GPs and our medical professions start to understand this disease and know someone's presenting, that every single case is unique, and not to read their results or their reports or their, the findings from surgery and take that at face value, to understand that how I experience this disease is completely unique to me and has nothing to do with how much disease there is in my body. And I think that's probably one of the most profound breakthroughs that we've had, is the research that showed us that, okay? Because that means that I'm not having to justify why I need lots of pain management, because my pain is my pain and I'm allowed to experience, I'm allowed to ask for the support that I need regardless of how extensive my disease is, okay? So I now, as a 50-year-old woman, am currently in perimenopause. So I now get to live with, excitingly, endometriosis symptoms. So I still suffer from pain when I ovulate, pain when I have a period, even though I don't have either of those things. And I also have perimenopause symptoms like night sweats, memory loss, which is super fun when you're doing things like recording a podcast and you can't find a word, and a lot of those other perimenopause conditions. And I'm being treated by a wonderful nurse practitioner, Julie, who I've had on my podcast, and I'm going to be having her on again this month. I'm really looking forward to that. I didn't know that my endometriosis would continue beyond this point. So there is a lot of misinformation out there about endometriosis. So I remember being told if I had children, it would fix my endo. Just to be clear, it did not. If I had a hysterectomy, it would fix my endo. It does not. So there is no definitive, if you do this, it will fix it, okay? It is incredibly hard to remove every single cell of endometriosis from your body so that it never comes back, okay? It's very hard for any gynecologist or surgeon to make that promise. And so there is always the risk of it coming back. And I would say that for most women, it is a very long and hard road. So if someone tells you they have endometriosis, give them a big hug, because they're likely to have been suffering for a long time and suffering in silence and living with a condition that doesn't have an end date. And I've had times in my life when I thought, I wish I had cancer, because then I could have treatment and it'd either get better and I would be cured, or it would get worse and I would die. I wouldn't have it hanging over me. And I'm sorry if that sounds really terrible, but it's been a really hard road to have this disease. There have been times when you just think, I'm fed up now and enough. And we don't get to have moments. Sorry, I'm getting emotional. So we don't get to have a break from our condition. We don't get to have periods where we live with great wellness and it hangs over us. So in terms of a medical condition, we now also know there's a lot of research being done into how does endometriosis affect our mental health. So most of us would understand that living with chronic pain, in almost all cases, if you live with chronic pain, I think it's for something like longer than 5 years, you're more than likely going to have some mental health problems associated with that, because it can cause a lot of depression and anxiety. And I now realize, as someone who has a much greater understanding than I did, for example, in my 20s, I now realize in my 20s, I definitely suffered anxiety and depression, both of which were linked to my pain. But I didn't understand both conditions well enough at the time to be able to articulate what anxiety was. So if I wasn't in pain, I was anxious that I was going to be in pain, but I didn't know what the words were. And I know that sounds really strange, but if you're my vintage, you'll remember that we didn't talk about mental health. We didn't understand what anxiety was. We definitely kind of knew what depression was, but I felt like depression was very serious and you were probably hospitalized and non-functioning, which of course is absolutely not true. And so I didn't identify I probably had depression and anxiety at the time when I'd been living with pain for a long time. And so at least now we know that we're getting treated in a more holistic manner. So many of us now get treated through specialist pelvic pain clinics. We have one here in Perth that I've been treated under. And this means we get treated by a board or a panel of people, not just a gynecologist who, if you give someone a hammer, they look for a nail. So if you put a gynecologist in the room, their job is to do surgery. So that's what they default to. So someone like me have had lots of surgeries, but now we get treated by a panel who will include like a gynecologist, a psychologist, people like a physiotherapist who specialize in pelvic physiotherapy. And so you're being treated by a panel who are trying to look at holistically, how can we improve your lifestyle? Now, this model actually came out of the UK of being treated by a team that's more like an allied health team rather than just your traditional medical approaches. So if you do have endometriosis, please know that in most states in Australia, the women's hospitals often have a pelvic pain clinic where you can get treated by a panel and look at how do you cope in life and what other things can we give you to help you cope. So one of the strategies that I was given was to do things like yoga, which is very gentle on your body. It can help you connect with your body, and it can actually help you be more resilient to pain. Okay, so that was actually a treatment that was given to me at a hospital, which I think is exciting because we want to see treatments beyond here's a drug, here's a surgery, because those are very blunt instruments, if you like. So we are definitely moving ahead with endometriosis, and we're definitely seeing changes come through. But I want you to understand that for many people who are diagnosed, it is a lifelong prognosis that we live with. We are going to be living with this for all of our life. And for some people, menopause will be the end of it. For other people like myself, because I've had so many surgeries, I'm likely to live with an underlying pain all of my life. Okay. So, and that's okay. I'm doing pretty well. Like I don't want you to think I have a terrible quality of life. I have an amazing quality of life because I have a really good pain management plan, with my specialist who will be on the podcast soon, Julie. So we'll talk to her about what that looks and feels like. So what would I love you to take away from today, I guess, is my final thought for you. I'd love you to talk to people in your life, both everyone, about periods and remove the shame. And let's remove the euphemisms that we use around it. Call it menstruating, call it a period. Those are the language that we want to be, if you want. But make it really clear this is what we're talking about, because all women have a period and we all have a cycle. And so there is no reason for us to feel ashamed or embarrassed about it. Okay. So start to talk about things as they are and not couch them in euphemisms because it's embarrassing. Goodness, we are well past that as a society, particularly here in Australia. Okay. So start talking about things as they are. I'm having my period at the moment and I'm a little bit tired. I'm having my period at the moment and I don't feel like going out. So be honest about that stuff. The other thing I want you to do is talk to the people in your world around it. So if a friend does say to you, I'm not going to go out tonight because I'm not feeling very well, got my period, probe a little bit further and go, are you okay? Because, I'm wondering if you're suffering a lot of pain. Do you feel like it's normal pain? Do you want me to have a chat? Because I know that I had no idea this disease existed and I had no idea that my pain wasn't normal, okay? Because we all have our own unique human experience and I can't step into your body. If I could have stepped into someone else's body when I was 15, I would have been able to tell you straight away, I'm living with the pain so different to yours, okay? But we can't do that. So remember what I said about if you can't control your period pain with normal over-the-counter pain medications like your standard paracetamol, your standard ibuprofen, that is not normal and you should have that investigated, okay? So if we can start to have those conversations that normalize talking about women's health, women's periods, and talking about pain, we're going to bring it into awareness where we're not embarrassed to say, I'm not coping, or I don't know if this is normal, but I don't feel like it is. So I want to encourage you to speak to everyone in your life about these things because the more we can normalize these conversations, the more people are able to access health and support. And that's what's really, really important because we know that the earlier endometriosis is diagnosed, the more likely we are to get in front of it. And it has, for those of you who are not aware, I didn't discuss it at the beginning, sorry. Endometriosis, obviously, because it's all wrapped up literally in our reproductive organs, can have really dire effects on our ability to have children. And so if you're not diagnosed for a long time, often when you're diagnosed, it can be too late and you can't have children. So the earlier we get diagnosed, the more we can get in front of pain and quality of life, but also protect our reproductive organs so that if we want to have children, that option is still available to us. So it's really, really important for you to have conversations, for you to talk openly and honestly about it. So if you're in a workplace, you're allowed to mention these things. One thing I have seen come through, and it was actually in Spain, that they have introduced extra sick days if you have endometriosis. And this means that you're able to work from home if you are suffering with that. And I think they gave people like 10 extra days sick day a year if you have endometriosis, which is wonderful because I know when I was in a corporate job, I used all my sick days, my endometriosis. Now I had anything else, I would drag myself into work regardless because I needed those sick days for when I was really struggling. So the more we talk about this, the more we speak with our politicians about it, the more we speak about it in our communities, the more understanding and acceptance there will be of this condition. And it's really my hope that next year, because I do an episode on endo every year, it would be so exciting for me to say, we now have a blood test and there's been a new groundbreaking treatment come through in another country. And these things happen because we create the groundswell. We start talking about things and our politicians hear us talking about them. They hear that this is important to us and they allocate funding based on that. So I hope from today that you've learned something about endometriosis. I hope you have. I hope you found it useful hearing my journey, because it's not been super fun and it continues to be very unfun a lot of the time. But it is really important to understand what this disease is and to talk about it with a wider circle. So thank you for indulging me today to let me talk about stuff that is personal to me. I know that's been 2 weeks in a row of very personal shares, and I'm totally fine with that because March is my month. So March is A, Endometriosis Awareness Month. B, it is the anniversary of when I started my business. And C, it's actually my birthday month as well. So I'm giving myself permission to have a month of self-indulgent podcasts where I'm going to share the things that matter to me as Sarah as a person, not just online social butterfly. So I hope you're enjoying it. Love to hear your feedback. Send me a DM on Instagram. Let me know what you think. But thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm truly grateful. If you have found this episode helpful, I don't really ask this, but please share it. Please share it on Insta, share it with your wider community, share it with anyone that you know, whether they run a business or not, because I want people to understand this condition and I want people to be able to talk about it. So thank you for indulging me again today. And as I said, I will catch you the same time next week on the Social Circus. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Social Circus. As your host, Sarah Thompson, I am thrilled that you've chosen to spend your time hanging out with me. I would be so grateful if you could spare an extra moment to go and leave me a review on your favorite podcasting platform. And if you even felt more excited, you could share my podcast with your friends who you think would get great value from it. Thanks so much again for tuning in.